In July 1940, Hitler's army was spreading terror across Europe. Nazi Germany had swept through France, Belgium, and the Netherlands in just a few short months. Now they were turning their guns toward Britain. To resist the looming threat, the British had one supremely important thing to protect: their gold reserves and national assets. Without assets, there would be no food, no weapons, and Britain would surely collapse. More crucially, if this immense fortune were to fall into Hitler's hands, the entire course of the war could change dramatically. Thus, a bold decision was made. The vast wealth would be shipped across the Atlantic to Canada. Why Canada? Choosing this North American country was no coincidence. It stemmed from the deep political and historical ties between the two nations. Centuries earlier, New France, covering much of what is now Canada, had been a French colony. After the 7 Years' War, the British forced France to cede the territory under the Treaty of Paris in 1763. From that point on, Canada officially became a British colony. In 1867, through the British North America Act, Canada was elevated to the status of a dominion, with the right to self-govern, its own parliament, and its own prime minister. However, foreign policy, defense, and military affairs remained under British control. During the First World War, these dominions became a crucial force, contributing and sacrificing greatly for the common victory of the British Empire. After the war, the idea of national self-determination spread, encouraged by US President Woodrow Wilson. The dominions now sought to be recognized as fully independent nations, no longer subordinate to Britain. Realistically, Britain understood that its dominions were vast and distant, with developed economies and stable political systems. It could no longer impose laws on them as it did on smaller colonies in Africa or Asia. In fact, many dominions had already been governing themselves almost entirely for years. Granting legal independence merely formalized what already existed. If Britain had continued to treat them as dependent colonies, dissatisfaction might have grown, leading to uncontrollable consequences. Thus, in 1926, the Imperial Conference declared that Britain and the Dominions were autonomous communities, equal in status, united in their common allegiance to the Crown. To formalize this, in 1931, the British Parliament passed the Statute of Westminster, granting Canada and other dominions legal independence. They still recognized the British monarch as head of state, but the empire had transformed into the modern Commonwealth of Nations. Financial ties between Britain and Canada beyond historical bonds, Britain also shared deep financial links with Canada. In 1935, the Bank of Canada was established. As one of the last Western nations to create a central bank, Canada looked to the Bank of England for guidance. Conversely, since the 1920s, the Bank of England had focused on helping develop central banks within the Commonwealth. From 1936 onward, Britain began opening gold deposit accounts in Canada as the threat of war with Germany grew more imminent. This activity intensified. By the end of 1938, the Bank of England had stored 3,304 gold bars in Canada. A year later, the total reached 4,748 bars. Transferring these treasures, however, was no easy task. Hundreds of tons of gold and other valuables had to cross the North Atlantic, a region teeming with German submarines. During the First World War, the ship SS Laurentic, carrying 43 tons of gold to Canada, had been sunk off the coast of Ireland. Should such a disaster repeat, the consequences would be catastrophic. This new operation was nothing short of a monumental gamble for Britain. The first transfer operation, in 1939, the plan to transfer wealth abroad was activated, coinciding with King George VI's historic royal visit to Canada. A perfect cover. 3 Royal Navy cruisers, HMS Southampton, HMS Glasgow, and HMS Repulse, were ordered to escort a special cargo. No one, not even the sailors, knew that their true mission was to transport 50 tons of gold, worth the equivalent of over £650 million today. Midway through the voyage, the King ordered HMS Repulse to return to Britain for another mission. The gold was transferred to the remaining 2 vessels, and the convoy pressed on. On June 15th, they reached Halifax, Canada. The cargo was unloaded at berth number 6, a secluded area of the port. Armed Canadian officers stood guard. The entire dock was under strict lockdown. Every crate of gold was thoroughly inspected and rechecked by senior officials of the Bank of Canada. From there, a special train carried the cargo to Montreal, Canada's financial capital. Operation Fish, 1940. In May 1940, Winston Churchill became Prime Minister of Britain. Addressing the nation, he declared, "This is our finest hour. We shall never surrender." To turn those words into action, all remaining gold, private securities, and corporate assets had to be sent to Montreal. This was the final piece to safeguard Britain's financial strength for the costly war ahead. The United States had made its stance clear. Weapons must be paid for in cash. Thus, Operation Fish was launched. Under the Emergency Powers Defense Act of 1939, the government gained sweeping wartime authority, controlling production, the economy, communications, and private property. Gold bars, foreign currency, and securities were immediately requisitioned by the Bank of England. Citizens were reassured their assets would be safe and returned after the war. This mechanism prevented capital flight, centralized financial resources for purchasing weapons and materials, and provided collateral for dealings with the US and Canada. When the collection phase ended, the massive operation to move the treasure began. Ports like Plymouth and Liverpool were overcrowded and too visible. There was only one way to ensure secrecy: disguise the cargo. But as what? The answer: fish. Fish shipments were common, bulky, smelly, and sealed in barrels of salt or ice. Perfect to deter inspections. Britain and Canada already had a strong seafood trade, making the ruse even more convincing. Every worker, sailor, and captain involved was told they were simply transporting fish. All weight limits were suspended. The only goal was to load everything aboard and set sail. On May 30th, 1940, the first vessel of the operation, HMS Revenge, departed Britain carrying assets worth £40 million, over £2 billion today. Soon after, other ships joined, including the RMS Antonia and RMS Duke of Richmond, each carrying around £10 million, and the RMS Furious, which successfully delivered £20 million to Canada. The HMS Emerald, which had escorted the royal couple to Canada in 1939, was refitted from bow to stern for maximum cargo capacity. On June 24, 1940, the Emerald quietly left Greenock, Scotland, bound across the frigid North Atlantic. On board were £30 million in gold and £200 million in bonds and securities. Every inch of space was used. Even the captain's cabin was packed with financial documents. Alexander Craig, the Bank of England's representative, reportedly slept on stacks of money for the entire voyage. Initially escorted by 2 destroyers, the Emerald was soon left on her own as the destroyers turned back amid a violent storm. Beneath the waves lurked an even greater danger: German U-boats. By June 1940, off the coast of Ireland, the Kriegsmarine was testing a deadly new tactic called the Wolf Pack. Groups of U-boats would patrol in lines to detect Allied convoys. Once contact was made, the nearest submarines would converge and attack under cover of night. Just a week before the Emerald sailed, a wolf pack had destroyed 5 Allied ships in Convoy HX-47, sinking over 40,000 tons of cargo and killing hundreds of sailors. Now, with the Emerald traveling alone, the mission hung by a thread. Only sheer luck brought her safely to Halifax on July 1st, 1940, her precious cargo intact save for minor storm damage. 4 days later, Operation Fish resumed with an even grander convoy. 5 ships, including 3 converted luxury liners, escorted by HMS Revenge and SS Bold Venture. Their combined cargo, £450 million, worth more than £20 billion today. The fleet battled dense fog, drifting icebergs and engine failures, all while evading lurking U-boats. Yet, miraculously, every ship arrived in Canada without a single crate lost. Within weeks, the operation had moved most of Britain's national wealth across the Atlantic, an almost unbelievable achievement. Upon arrival, the crates of gold and securities were transported to the Sun Life building in Montreal, the largest office building in the British Commonwealth at the time. By then, most of Canada's gold vaults were already full, not just from Britain, but from other European nations that had secretly sent their reserves earlier. A 3-story underground vault was hastily constructed beneath the Sun Life building. Short on steel, workers used reclaimed railway beams to reinforce the walls. A massive vault door, borrowed from the Royal Bank of Canada, was installed in concrete over a metre thick. Above ground, more than 5,000 office employees carried on their work, unaware that beneath their feet lay one of the greatest treasures in human history. Most of the securities and confidential documents were locked in over 900 filing cabinets, while the gold was transported to the Bank of Canada headquarters in Ottawa. With this addition, the vault on Wellington Street became the largest gold reserve in the world outside the United States during the Second World War. By the war's end, records showed 186,332 gold bars and 226 tons of coins stored safely in Ottawa, belonging to Britain and several European allies. Throughout this historic mission, Canada displayed remarkable generosity, charging no fees for storage or handling. By the time Operation Fish concluded, every ounce of wealth was intact. Hundreds of Canadian workers toiled in secrecy in the vaults, working 12-hour shifts without a single leak of information. Not until 1946, when documents were declassified, did the public learn the truth about Operation Fish. Looking back, it's easy to see that Britain never fell to Nazi Germany, but at that time, no one could be certain. Had Hitler seized that financial lifeline, the outcome of the war might have been very different. Britain had risked everything to secure the world's freedom. In the end, Operation Fish stands as a monumental feat of secrecy, courage, and logistics, forever remembered as one of the greatest financial operations in history.